What if the truth about war was never hidden in history books, but buried in the reels of old films? Imagine watching scenes that felt too real, only to discover later that they were based on classified missions and eyewitness accounts. These are not just movies. These are confessions disguised as cinema. Today we uncover 15 war movies that historians say are closer to truth than anyone ever realized. Number 15. The Thin Red Line, 1998. It was not made to glorify battle. It was made to haunt you. Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line arrived quietly during the same year as Saving Private Ryan, yet historians now argue it captured the mental collapse of soldiers more truthfully than any modern film. Set during the Battle of Guadalcanal, the story follows ordinary men lost in the tropical inferno of the Pacific. The film is slow, dreamlike, and filled with quiet dread. Malick based many scenes on first-hand diaries and oral histories of Marines who fought there. The grass waving over corpses, the whispered thoughts of men praying to a silent God, those came straight from letters once censored by military censors for being too bleak. Studios panicked at its strange tone. Some executives feared audiences would walk out since it had more philosophy than explosions. But veterans who saw it knew the truth. Many said it looked and felt exactly like the real island where the heat suffocated every breath and men went mad under the sun. Over the years, The Thin Red Line became a cult study in psychological warfare. It vanished for a while, overshadowed by louder war movies, but resurfaced as historians revealed how closely it mirrored the real Guadalcanal campaign. Even the character names matched entries in forgotten field reports. Its legacy is not of victory, but of quiet despair. It reminds us that the truest stories of war are not shouted through gunfire. They are whispered through trembling voices that survived it. Number 14. Come and See, 1985. This film does not show war. It makes you live it. Come and See was a Soviet production banned in several regions for its unbearable realism. Historians later confirmed that director Alim Klimov consulted surviving partisans from Belarus who described Nazi atrocities in horrifying detail. The film follows a young boy named Flyora who joins resistance fighters during the German invasion. What begins as patriotic enthusiasm descends into a hallucinatory nightmare of burned villages and screams that never end. Every explosion was real. The actors stood near live ammunition. Cows were actually shot during filming because the crew refused to fake what had already happened in those villages. Even Soviet censors trembled. They delayed its release, claiming it would traumatize audiences. The film almost disappeared, but word spread through underground screenings, and critics whispered that it might be the most honest war film ever made. Western historians who later studied the records of Nazi massacres found that many scenes were near identical to eyewitness reports from the Katyn massacre and others across Eastern Europe. When it finally premiered, audiences wept openly. Some collapsed. The realism was unbearable yet undeniably true. Decades later, veterans and historians alike agreed it had captured not battle but annihilation, the kind that no propaganda could polish. Today, Come and See stands as a brutal monument to truth through art. It shows that some horrors cannot be described in history books, only in screams echoing through film reels. Number 13. Das Boot, 1981. Claustrophobic, terrifying, and deeply authentic. Das Boot brought viewers inside a German U-boat where the line between courage and madness dissolved. When it was first released, even former U-boat commanders admitted it felt too close to their memories. Director Wolfgang Petersen insisted on recreating every detail from real wartime blueprints. The submarine set was built inside a rotating steel cylinder to simulate violent dives. The actors were trapped in it for days without light or fresh air. Many fainted. Their sweat and exhaustion on camera were real. German authorities hesitated to support the project, fearing it might romanticize Nazi sailors. Petersen fought that notion, saying he wanted to show war from the human level, not the ideological one. Historians later confirmed that the script drew heavily from wartime diaries of journalist Lothar Günther Buchheim, who actually sailed on a U-boat mission. At its release, some politicians condemned it for showing sympathy toward the enemy. but veterans praised its accuracy, describing the endless humidity, the sound of depth charges, and the quiet dread that came before the hull cracked. The film was so precise that naval historians used it to teach about submarine tactics. Over time, Das Boot transcended its controversy and became a reference for submarine realism. Even Hollywood directors studying underwater warfare admitted they could not surpass its authenticity. It remains proof that the closer you get to truth, the less glamorous war becomes. Number 12. Letters from Iwo Jima, 2006. Most war films are told through one side of the barrel. Letters from Iwo Jima turned that barrel around. Directed by Clint Eastwood and filmed back-to-back with Flags of Our Fathers, it offered something no Hollywood production had ever dared before. It told the story of the Battle of Iwo Jima through the eyes of the Japanese soldiers themselves. Historians later confirmed that Eastwood's script was built upon real letters discovered buried in the volcanic sands of the island decades after the war. These were written by men who knew they would never return home. Their words of honor, sorrow, and fading hope inspired entire sequences of dialogue. When the project was first announced, Japanese veterans feared it would insult their memory. But Eastwood's careful respect and attention to cultural authenticity changed their minds. The film's cast underwent military training under Japanese defense instructors. Even the tunnels were recreated from original engineering blueprints smuggled from wartime archives. Censors in both nations hesitated. Some called it too sympathetic to the enemy. Others said it was too honest about the futility of command. But when it finally premiered, historians praised it as the most authentic portrayal of the Imperial Army's final stand ever committed to film. What makes Letters from Iwo Jima unforgettable is not the combat, but the silence between gunfire. It is a film that doesn't ask who was right, but who was left. It stands as a cinematic truce between two histories that had never before spoken to each other. Number 11. Paths of Glory, 1957. Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory was banned in several countries for decades, yet historians today call it one of the most accurate depictions of the psychological rot inside World War I's trench system. Based on real French court-martials, it portrayed soldiers sentenced to die simply to cover the shame of failed officers. Kubrick shot the battle sequences in long, relentless takes to make the audience feel trapped in the mud. Historians later compared those visuals to photographs from the Verdun front and found eerie precision. Even the dialogues between generals and captains were lifted from surviving transcripts of the Swan Corporal's affair, an event the French government long tried to suppress. The French army protested furiously, calling the film anti-military and anti-national. It was banned from French theaters until the 1970s. In Germany and Switzerland, it faced similar restrictions. But American historians studying declassified French military archives later verified that Kubrick's story aligned almost exactly with historical documents once sealed by the War Ministry. Behind the scenes, Kirk Douglas fought to preserve the film's ending when studios demanded a more patriotic tone. He refused, saying truth was more powerful than propaganda. That decision cost Kubrick several future contracts in Europe. When Paths of Glory finally resurfaced decades later, it became a moral compass for modern war cinema. It showed that courage does not always wear medals and that the battlefield is not the only place where humanity dies. Number 10. Black Hawk Down, 2001. Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down is often remembered for its chaos. Historians remember it for something else, its precision. Based on Mark Bowden's detailed reporting of the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, it reconstructed every street, every call sign, every moment of panic with near-documentary discipline. Scott worked with Delta Force and Army Rangers who had survived the operation. Their after-action reports were used word for word in several radio dialogues. Every vehicle on set was an exact copy of the original military hardware. Even the Yaal bullet patterns on walls matched photos taken by soldiers that day. Controversy came quickly. Critics accused the film of glorifying American intervention. Others said it ignored the Somali perspective. But military historians defended it, saying no other film had captured urban warfare's unpredictability so authentically. Some analysts even used it in training simulations. What most viewers did not know was that the Pentagon initially refused to cooperate. The operation had been a diplomatic disaster, but after Scott promised historical neutrality, they relented, granting him limited access to aerial footage and classified technical data. When it premiered, veterans who had fought there broke down. They said it was like reliving every second. Historians later confirmed that even small details such as the malfunctioning of night vision gear were based on verified accounts. Black Hawk Down remains one of the few modern war films historians accept as both cinematic and instructional. It is not about victory. It is about survival against the silence that follows failed orders. Number 9. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. No movie ever felt more real and dangerous than The Battle of Algiers. Shot like a documentary using non-professional actors, it recreated the Algerian War of Independence so accurately that several governments banned it outright. Historians later confirmed that every scene mirrored real events pulled straight from French military archives and interviews with resistance leaders. Director Gillo Pontecorvo worked directly with Seydi Youssef, a former commander of the National Liberation Front, who not only advised but acted in the film as a fictionalized version of himself. The result was so convincing that both revolutionaries and counterinsurgency experts studied it for years. The Pentagon screened it in 2003 for officers heading to Iraq as a lesson in urban guerrilla tactics. The French government condemned the movie. Some politicians accused it of fueling anti-colonial sentiment. But the truth was simple. It showed how an empire collapsed under its own brutality. The torture scenes were drawn from real testimonies. The explosions in the Kasbah were mapped from police reports. Even the camera angles matched photographs taken by war correspondents. At its release, the film caused riots in Paris. Audiences left in silence. Yet historians later recognized it as the closest any movie had come to merging cinema and reality. Over decades, the Battle of Algiers has remained banned in some military circles, yet studied by others. It stands as proof that truth and rebellion can share the same frame. Number 8. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan is often cited as the definitive World War II movie. Historians go further. They call it one of the most accurate combat recreations ever filmed. The opening Omaha Beach sequence was based directly on first-hand testimonies from D-Day, veterans, and original combat footage from war correspondents who landed with the first wave. Spielberg hired real veterans to consult on uniforms, weapons, and tactics. The actors endured week-long boot camp training under former Marine Captain Dale Dye, who recreated the emotional exhaustion soldiers described in their letters. Even the mud and blood were matched to color photos from 1944 archives. When the film premiered, veterans across America wept in theaters. Many said it was the first time they had felt seen rather than celebrated, but controversy followed. Some countries hesitated to broadcast the unflinching carnage on national TV, calling it too traumatic. The United States Department of Defense even debated whether it was too real for recruitment screenings. Historians later compared the Omaha scene shot by shot with military records and concluded that Spielberg's version captured more truth in 20 minutes than most textbooks did in entire chapters. It redefined how cinema portrays war, not as heroism, but as endurance. Today, Saving Private Ryan is used in classrooms and museums to teach the human cost of combat. It remains an unflinching reminder that realism can wound as deeply as history itself. Number 7. The Pianist, 2002. Roman Polanski's The Pianist is not only a film, it is testimony. Based on the memoir of Władysław Szpilman, a Polish-Jewish pianist who survived the Warsaw Ghetto, the movie has been verified by historians as one of the most accurate portrayals of life under Nazi occupation. Polanski himself was a child survivor of the Krakow Ghetto. Every ruined street and hiding place he recreated was drawn from his own memories. Historians later confirmed that several sequences, including the destruction of the ghetto walls, matched actual photographs taken by German soldiers in 1943. The film faced controversy upon release. Critics accused Polanski of emotional manipulation, yet historians defended it, saying it reflected recorded survivor accounts down to the smallest detail: the makeshift shelters, the starvation, the eerie calm before deportations. Even the German officer who spares Szpilman, Captain Wilhelm Hosenfeld, was proven real after his wartime diary was unearthed years later. Audiences worldwide were shaken by its realism. Survivors of the Holocaust recognized the locations. The cold apartment where Spielman hides mirrored real blueprints of the street where the pianist once lived. The Pianist is now preserved in historical archives, not just as cinema, but as evidence. It transcends storytelling to become a witness in film form. It teaches that history's truth can survive through sound and silence when memory alone begins to fade. Number 6. Apocalypse Now, 1979. It began as fiction and ended as prophecy. Apocalypse Now was supposed to be a loose adaptation of Heart of Darkness, but what emerged was something historians later called a psychological record of the Vietnam War's madness. Francis Ford Coppola's production spiraled into the same chaos it was trying to portray, and that chaos mirrored the real battlefield more than anyone expected. The jungle was real. The humidity was real. The fear was real. Helicopters loaned by the Philippine military flew actual combat missions between takes. Martin Sheen suffered a heart attack during filming and kept going because Coppola refused to cut the scene. Historians who compared the script to Vietnam field reports found chilling overlaps in language, tactics, and atmosphere. When it premiered, veterans were divided. Some called it insane, others said it was the only movie that captured how the war truly felt: disorganized, aimless, and feverish. The U.S. military refused cooperation and banned screenings on bases claiming it distorted history. Yet years later, officers privately admitted the film mirrored their unspoken memories. Apocalypse Now blurred the line between nightmare and reality. Historians still debate whether it documented a war or predicted its psychological aftermath. It endures as a fever dream too close to truth to ever fade. Number 5. Downfall, 2004. When Downfall premiered, it shocked audiences with its intimacy. Never before had a film placed viewers so close to Adolf Hitler's final days. Historians immediately noticed something rare: it was almost entirely accurate. Every scene, from the bunker meetings to Hitler's trembling breakdowns, was reconstructed from the diaries of Traudl Junge, his personal secretary, and verified with Soviet and German reports. Director Oliver Hirschbiegel insisted on absolute authenticity. The lighting was modeled after actual bunker conditions. The actors rehearsed using real transcripts from the Führer's final hours. Even the sound of footsteps echoing through concrete halls was recorded in a replica built with precise measurements from wartime blueprints. The controversy came swiftly. Some critics said it humanized evil, but historians defended it, arguing that truth is not sympathy. What made Downfall unsettling was its honesty. Hitler was shown not as a monster from legend, but as a decaying human being surrounded by denial, fear, and collapsing ideology. German schools debated whether to include the film in history lessons. Many eventually did because experts confirmed its fidelity to the record. Downfall remains one of the most meticulously researched war films ever produced, a mirror held to the final breath of tyranny. Its legacy is haunting because it reminds us that evil does not vanish in myth. It dies in silence, surrounded by lies it once created. Number 4. Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone's Platoon was not a script, it was a confession. Stone had fought in Vietnam himself, and historians say his film comes closer to the reality of combat than any government report ever released. He used his own memories and those of other soldiers to reconstruct the daily exhaustion, confusion, and paranoia that defined the conflict. The cast lived in the jungle for weeks without showers or comfort. They ate military rations, slept under rain, and woke up to live ammunition drills. The realism broke them down just as the war had broken real soldiers. Historians later confirmed that the film's patrol scenes matched tactics documented in U.S. infantry manuals from 1969. When it premiered, veterans recognized it instantly. There were no heroes, no strategy, only survival. Some veterans walked out shaking while others stayed weeping, saying at last someone had told the truth. The Department of Defense initially refused cooperation, fearing it would harm morale. Stone did not care. He wanted honesty, not approval. Platoon won the Academy Award for Best Picture, but its real achievement was historical: its ability to make audiences feel the moral corrosion of war rather than just watch it. Historians now teach it as both cinema and document proof that the line between memory and history can sometimes be the same frame of film. Number 3. 1917-2019. Sam Mendes's 1917 stunned audiences with its illusion of being shot in one continuous take, but beneath that cinematic technique lay an extraordinary level of historical precision. Mendes based the story on his grandfather's real accounts of the Western Front, where two young soldiers are sent across no man's land to deliver an impossible message. Historians were amazed at how closely the film matched surviving diaries and war photography from 1917. Every trench bunker and crater was recreated from real military blueprints. Costume designers studied the fading textures of original uniforms stored in British archives. Even the mud was analyzed to match the soil composition of northern France during spring rainfall. Actors rehearsed alongside historians who taught them authentic marching rhythm and battlefield communication. The film's realism was so striking that several war museums adopted clips for educational exhibits. Veterans' descendants recognize family names etched on props and letters used in the movie. Mendes avoided grand speeches, choosing instead to show exhaustion, isolation, and silent endurance, the real conditions that soldiers faced day after day. When 1917 premiered, modern historians called it one of the most visually faithful war recreations ever achieved. It did not glorify heroism, it showed persistence, the will to keep moving when the world had turned to smoke and dirt. It proved that sometimes truth is best told not in words but in footsteps echoing through the ruins of history. Number 2. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Before any modern epic dared to show the horror of war, All Quiet on the Western Front did it first. Released just a decade after World War I, it was adapted from Erich Maria Remarque's novel written by a real German veteran. Historians later revealed how deeply rooted it was in actual frontline experiences, from gas attacks to shattered friendships. Director Louis Milestone recreated the Western Front using authentic trench maps and real veterans as extras. Many scenes were based on testimonies collected by Allied and German nurses after the armistice. The film's unflinching realism shocked audiences who were still healing from the war. It showed soldiers vomiting from shell shock, drowning in mud, and screaming for mothers no one could hear. Censors across Europe panicked. The Nazi Party banned it, calling it defeatist and anti-patriotic. In Berlin, protesters released mice in theaters to disrupt screenings. Yet historians later praised it as the first true anti-war film grounded entirely in first-hand truth. The camera did not flinch, and neither did the message that youth is always the first casualty. Decades later, military historians confirmed that every uniform insignia and formation was correct to 1918 regulation. The realism of All Quiet on the Western Front set a standard that cinema still struggles to match. It taught the world that truth is the most dangerous weapon a film can wield. Number 1. Schindler's List, 1993. Few films have ever approached the Holocaust with the same truth and restraint as Schindler's List. Steven Spielberg created not just a movie but a historical document crafted from eyewitness interviews and archival evidence from the Shoah Foundation. Historians confirm that nearly every scene was cross-checked with survivor testimony. The factory scenes were shot in authentic locations around Krakow. Survivors visited the set and guided actors on how people moved, spoke, and endured in those conditions. The black and white cinematography was chosen not for art, but accuracy, because the original Nazi propaganda footage had been monochrome. Spielberg worked closely with historians to ensure that every line of dialogue spoken by the real Oskar Schindler came from surviving transcripts. Even the haunting scene of the girl in the red coat was inspired by an actual event recorded by witnesses during the liquidation of the ghetto. When it was released, survivors and historians alike said it was the closest cinema had ever come to reliving truth without distortion. It was screened in schools across the world as a teaching tool and was stored in the United States National Film Registry for preservation as historical evidence. Schindler's List endures not because it entertains, but because it remembers. It reminds humanity that the most powerful stories of war are not about victory or defeat. They are about the fragile mercy that survives amid destruction. Across decades, these 15 films have dared to show truth, not as history books tell it, but as survivors lived it. Each frame a confession, each silence a memory that refuses to fade. Which of these war movies do you think captured reality most completely? Tell us below, and if truth in cinema still matters to you, like and subscribe because the next story might reveal the one history tried to erase.